Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, or whatever kind of crazy time it is where Adam is in Mauritius. Mauritius, 4 a.m. I understand. Wow. We're delighted to have Adam Hamdy here with us to talk about his brand new book, The Other Side of Night. And joining us is our friend Peng Shepherd, who the author of The Cartographers, and she dropped by and signed a fresh batch of copies for us. And so she's kindly agreed to do the heavy lifting on the interview here. And of course, Barbara tuning in from home. It's a group effort. And I'll be monitoring the comments or questions field on YouTube and Facebook. So if you have questions for Adam or Pong, go ahead and put them in, and I'd be happy to come back on screen and ask any questions you might have. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much. Actually, the way we do this has a theatrical aspect. Patrick appears and disappears, sort of a, excuse me, sliding door effect or Shakespearean. I've asked him whether he thinks that he's Caliban or Ariel. And I think he varies back and forth. But anyway, it's really a pleasure to meet you, Adam. Thank you so much for either getting up or staying up, whichever you did.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Barbara.
I feel as though I have this cup of tea. I feel as though I should try to transmit it to you across the ether. Normally our events are BYOB, but that won't really work for you unless you're an actual drunk. I don't know.
No, not this time of day.
No. So what we have is a very inventive, unusual novel that I have sort of tried to grasp a way to talk about it that without spoilers, and largely failed. So I'm really delighted. I'm really delighted that Peng Shepherd is going to take the baton and see what happens. And I have to say, because we did a lovely event for the Cartographers back when it published, there were similar problems in that, if we talked about the really cool stuff, we blew the whole book. So we talked all around it, and sometimes that leads to digressions. So I want to say, don't fear the digressions, because sometimes they're the only thing that can save you when you have a book like this. I love it. So it is a British mystery. I mean, at least it takes place there. And in theory, it's kind of a police procedural. So with that, Pong, I'll see what you have to say.
Oh gosh. Well, actually, I want to say before I start asking you questions, Adam, that I got an advanced copy a couple of weeks ago, and I just finished it. And I mean, really, the only word I have is wow. It's been, because we all, as readers and as writers, we read a lot. And so when you read a lot, you get really good at being able to kind of understand story or predict story. And it has been like such a long time since a book really, truly surprised me, and where I thought I knew where it was going, and I was just so wrong. And I won't, I'm going to stop there because I don't want to spoil it, but it has been such a long time since I've had that feeling of like, I have no idea where this is going in a really good way. So I just wanted to say that. And I think maybe the best way to start would be to ask you to, kind of tell us a little bit of what the book is about, because I think if I hear the way that you describe it, I'll know how far I can go with my questions.
Oh, thanks very much for that, Pung, and thanks very much for hosting this, Barbara and Patrick and Poison Pen. It's really great to be here. I'm still practicing. I've been working on this book for now coming up to 6 years, and I'm still practicing how to talk about it. It starts with Harriet Kilty, who's a disgraced former police officer, and that's where the procedural element comes into it. And she discovers a message written in a book that she buys in a used bookstore. And the message says, "Help, he's trying to kill me." And she's a point in her life where she has nothing going on, and that detective in her won't rest. And she sort of views this as a way potentially to get her old job back and redeem herself. And so she discovers who wrote the message and tracks them down and finds out that the person who wrote the message, who's the last person to have borrowed the book from a library, has died. And when she goes to visit this person's house, she discovers that the man living there is the guy, a guy called Ben Elmis, who she once thought was the love of her life, and who sort of split up with her rather cruelly. And they meet again under these really strange circumstances where she now suspects him of murder. And the husband of the woman, Beth Asher, is a guy called David Asher, and he's also disappeared in mysterious circumstances, believed to have taken his own life out on the Welsh coast. And so Ben has been left to care for their son, Elliot. And so Harriet begins this investigation, trying to find out the truth of what happened to these people who've been killed. And, the more she looks into it, the more Ben, the former love of her life, is in the frame. And, she's driven by wanting to solve a case, redeem herself, get her career back, but also, a care for this child who she thinks may be in danger. So that's the kind of setup and premise of the book, and it goes places that are unexpected.
Yeah, it definitely does. So you have, so you've got kind of a lot going on right at the outset. There's like the family tragedy subplot, then there's also the police procedural subplot, and then there's sort of a very tragic romance subplot, because as you said, Harry and Ben at one point were together. They're not anymore. But also it's a lot more complicated now because he may be a murderer or not. And so can you talk a little bit about how, where did you first get the idea for this book? What sparked it? Was it one of those different three things, or how did it all kind of come together?
So the first initial sort of inspiration for it was, we were out walking as a family in the Peak District in the Roaches, which is a real place behind the house where the some of the story takes place, where the Ashers live, which is again a real place. And our son Elliot, not to confuse things even further, but I had to name the main character after him because he inspired this book with a question. He just turned around to me and asked this question, and I immediately thought, oh wow, that's just an incredible, that's the spark for a story. It's a really sort of touching question, and I can't even talk about the question without revealing a spoiler. Oh. So but it just struck me, and I just thought, wow, there's a story there. And I started working on it immediately. And as I say, at the time he was 8, and now he's turning 14 in November. So it's been sort of almost 6 years. And I started working on it sort of straight away. And, I think in your note in the Cartographers, you say that you had lots of deadlines in between and different things that you were working on, but the story just sort of stuck with you, and this idea stuck with you. And it was the same thing. It just kept coming back, and I tried different ways of resolving it and tried with various different formats and things, and it just wasn't working. And a few things kind of happened to bring the book together over those years, but the initial spark was that question from our son.
Okay. And has he gotten to read it yet?
Yes, he has.
Oh.
So he is an absolutely avid reader. I mean, he loves reading, always has. In fact, all three of our kids are sort of big readers, but he in particular just inhales books. So for booksellers, he's a dream to hear about, because he's a young 14-year-old boy who just loves books. So we're getting him into Jack Carr at the moment, because that's his niche at the moment. But yeah, he read it, and actually I'd forgotten that he was reading it, and he just came out. We live in a sort of colonial style bungalow, and he just sort of walked onto the veranda one day, absolutely streaming with tears. And I ran over to him. I said, oh my God, what's wrong? What's wrong? I thought he'd injured himself or something. Yeah. And he just said, I've just finished the book. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And I'd completely, sort of forgotten that he was reading it. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He said, no, it was amazing. He said, I can't believe that, this is something that I inspired. And obviously the book is dedicated to him. So, he has read it. He really enjoyed it, but it did kind of break his heart.
Oh, that's sad, but so wonderful that I'm glad that he, yeah. And so you said that because you said he originally asked you this question when he was about 8, and then now he's 14, and he just got to read the final version. And so that's what, yeah, 5 or 6 years in there that you said
Yeah,
about, and you had
yeah.
deadlines in between. And what was the process of writing it like? Did you have a plan, or was it that figuring out how to start it, or you know what I mean? Because I'm assuming you must, without revealing what the twist is, you probably knew what the twist is pretty early in your process, or did that also kind of surprise you?
No, I knew that the whole thing. So the final sort
Okay.
of so the penultimate two chapters form the basis of a short story, and that was what I worked on first. And I had that
Okay.
really early on. I wrote that really early on, and it kind of delivered for me, but it was missing those emotion, like really kind of powerful emotional beats. And so I tried writing it as a novel, and yeah, I was working according to a plan, but I had the wrong plan. So I wrote 50,000 words of this novel, and it just didn't
Oh wow.
didn't sort of sing for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those things where, and this rarely happens to me. Usually, if I have a plan and I know where I'm going, I finish and I'm pleased, I'm happy with what I've written. With this one, I just thought, no, there's something missing. And I just put it all in the bin. I just threw it all away.
Oh
That was
wow.
50, yeah, 50,000 words I put in the bin. So
Wow.
then I thought, let me have a go at it as a screenplay. And and I did that. I finished that. I was sort of, no, this isn't working for me again. And I put that
Hmm.
in the bin. And I did another screenplay, put that in the bin. So it took a while to
Yeah.
figure out what was missing. And actually, I was teaching at an Arvon Foundation course, which is a big writing foundation in the UK. And I was teaching there. It's a residential. You spend a week there. And I was teaching there, and I went for a walk in the woods. It's in John Osborne's old house. Um, and for people who don't know, he was a sort of very big playwright. It's a beautiful place in the Shropshire countryside. I went for a walk in the woods near the house, and I met a gentleman who was walking a dog. And I just commented on the dog. I said, lovely dog. And he said, oh, it was my daughter's. She died last week.
Oh.
And it was the most sort of tragic and profound opening to a conversation I've ever had. And this guy talked to me for 20 minutes about grief and loss and the loss of his daughter and this, just. And so I sort of consoled him the best that I could, as a sort of complete stranger. And but the moment I got back to the Arvon house, I just thought, wow, that's what's missing from the book. That's
Okay.
the perspective that it needs to elevate it into something quite magical. And I think that's something that strikes me about both our books, actually, is that even though they're not what you would typically call magical
Hmm.
novels, they have a magical feeling about them.
Hmm.
They have a magical element to them that I think transcends what I would call the ordinary. And for some people that's an issue, but I think for a lot of people it's exactly what you were talking about, that gives you an experience that's new,
Hmm.
you haven't seen for a while, you haven't felt it for a while. And it's actually the reason, looking at our kids who read all the time, it's why kids get into reading. It's to take them into that kind of elevated magical world. And so I want to flip it around on you, Peng, and just ask you about the cartographers and how you captured that kind of element in your book.
Well, I think we might have had sort of similar difficulties with getting both of our books started, because I did a very similar thing where I would, get like 30,000 words or 50,000 words into it, and it didn't have that magic and it didn't have that feeling, and I could tell it was missing something. And I don't know if it was like this for you, but for me, I was so focused on the maps and making them, kind of surreal or mysterious, or I was obsessed with getting the secret that was on the map correct, and I had it correct, but the whole thing kept falling flat. And it wasn't until I realized that it's not necessarily just about the map. The story has to be about the people that find the map, and it's specifically about this group of 7 friends. And then later, some of those friends are a family, and that family, that that was really what made it feel special. Because if you've got a secret on a map, but you don't care about the people who have got the map. It's just, there's nothing there. It has to be about, in addition to this really cool map, it has to be about like love and family and, the secrets between them and the obsessions that they have and who's going to control it, who's greedy, who's generous, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's, that's something that strikes me about both of our books is that at the heart of it, even though it's this very big, mysterious thing that's going on, it's all about a family. And I think that's what brings readers in initially and then keeps them there, because even as they're reading this, grand mystery and trying to figure out like, how is this going to end? How is it all going to line up? You're doing that because you care about the characters,
Yeah. And you've got father-daughter sort of at the heart of your book, and I've got father-son at the heart of my book. And so you're absolutely right. It's those kind of profound connections that I think pull people in and keep them with you whilst this bigger thing is going on. What I think, do you feel that this book was a revelatory experience for you as a writer? Like, do you feel like you've kind of leveled up
with the Cartographers?
Yeah.
I did learn a lot, I think, because it was also, for me, it was the first time trying to write a mystery, because my first book, The Book of M, I would call it more of a road trip, and so it was a totally different writing experience because it's just sort of like the characters see something and then they move further on their road trip and they encounter a new obstacle and they keep moving. And so there's a very clear path forward the whole time. And this was the first time I had to come up with compelling characters and a compelling story, but make it a mystery, which I think, since it was my first one, it was really hard. I don't know if you have any tips for me about how to plan or write mysteries. I would love to hear them.
Actually, I do.
Please.
Let me say a few things here because I found this really interesting. I agree that there are many things in common with your books. And, perhaps we all expect that a mystery, whether it's a fraud going on in your case, or, death and an investigation in your case, that it has to be kind of nitty gritty real, that crime fiction, it doesn't allow for blurring of reality or bringing in other elements, but if you go back, and I mean, when I was a child, my favorite books and the ones I really cut my reading teeth on were the Oz books. And, it was full of fantastic characters. And I realized that I grew up when I was about 10 years old and came to the hideous realization that I would never get to Oz. I mean, absolutely thought up until then that it was a place that I could go because I could go in a book, right?
Yeah.
And so, the relationships in there, Dorothy wanting to go home and, the wizard is a con man, you pull the screen in the whole bit. It's all a blend. But particularly, I think when you're a child, that's okay. Fairy tales are like that. What I've noticed over the last few years, as the world's getting increasingly grim, is that this is creeping into all kind of literature, that there are blends of the fantastical or the alternate realities or, otherworldly experiences, or just time is confused, or, it's a whole lot of things that go on. And I think readers are going with it because I think, there's actually more escape from where we are if you are able to go to somewhere more magical. The other thing that's happened that helps with this is that the Gothic, I predicted it 2 years ago, the Gothic is making a comeback. So is horror, but I like the Gothic. And the Gothic is full of, that sort of thing, the fall of the House of Usher, or, even the Murders at the Rue Morgue, which is like a foundational book, in crime fiction. You still have all that going on. So there are kind of cycles, I think, in fiction, things that go up, things that go down. And also you guys are, both of you, kind of on a frontier of, blending various elements of literature, and yet still the mystery has probably the clearest form of fiction, and a lot of new writers are drawn to it. Peng, it's interesting that you are doing it second because it has a structure. I mean, your road trip has a structure. That's absolutely true. You didn't have to figure that out. But I've had many authors say that they came to crime fiction because it had a skeleton that they could hang their story on. They didn't have to try to figure out the structure. And I think it's an incredibly fluid form that, can embrace almost anything. So as I say, my only frustration here is not to be able to talk about those things that are really original to this. But I will say to readers, I think you do need to embrace, a fluidity. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about, in Peng, in a way, it's true of the maps, is that there's a rise of the sort of book within a book mystery, where the book is an instrument of what? Discovery. It's has a foreboding aspect. It has a predictive aspect, like that. So did you always, Adam, have the idea of discovering a book in a bookshop with a hidden message in it? Did that come to you late, or was that there from the beginning?
So I put in a library or a bookstore in pretty much every book that I write. And this is, this for me, and I'm just trying to count it up, was the 9th book I've written. So it's
I'll count.
Congratulations.
It's the 5, 6, 7. I come up with 8, but maybe they.
So it's the 8th published book.
Yeah.
But it's the 9th that I've written. I've got one that I've written before this that's coming out next year.
Okay.
So, but in every one of my books, there's a bookstore or a library. And the simple reason for that is because when I was a kid, we didn't have money at all. And so I would always go to the local library twice a week and borrow books. And if we bought books, they were always from used bookstores. So that was always my gateway into magical worlds. And to me, it's just a little endorsement of indie bookstores or libraries to have some kind of reference or some kind of scene taking place. And actually, when I was planning out this book, I knew exactly where it needed to be, because there is a bookshop called the Nantwich Bookshop, which was the place I did my first ever author event. And it has a cafe and there's a used bookstore upstairs. And I knew that this had to take place there, because that combination is quite rare, to have a very thriving used bookstore within a sort of, a bookstore that sells new books as well. And a cafe and everything. And so I knew where it was going to be right from the outset. And it just fit with my normal sort of, so watch out. I may put the poison pen in some future novel. So yeah, I like to do it. I think it's a little way of saying thanks.
That would be lovely. C.J. Box actually constructed an entire thriller with Scottsdale.
Oh, wow.
With Scottsdale as the killing field. The poison pen was the crime scene with the killer in the Hotel Valley Ho right up the street was where the killer checked in.
Scottsdale has a special place in my heart because we honeymooned at the Boulders.
Of course.
Wow.
That's where we went on our honeymoon, and it was just an amazing place to visit. So it means something to me. So it
used to be a rock resort, as we called it. Actually, literally, it's a rock resort.
Yeah.
But also it was part of the Rockefeller chain. So there was a kind of nice double entendre when you talked about the Boulders. Everybody would yuck it up and say the Rocks Resort. Do you remember that, Peng? Have you been there?
No, I haven't. I've been to the Valley Ho, but I haven't been to the other one.
Well, it's actually on the Carefree Cave Creek border. If you take Scottsdale Road all the way north, you run right into it. It's this jumble of boulders and boulders. And hidden in there, it's almost like a hat trick. Hidden in the boulders is the hotel, but you can't really see it, behind
in a vague reference. Now we are off at a tangent. In a vague reference to maps, we were badly misled by a map when we came for the honeymoon, because we looked at the map and we thought, this place is quite close to, and it was a folding map. This place is quite close to this cowboy resort, Rawhide. We could just walk there.
That's because you're British. And here's the thing, and it every once in a while amazes our British guests enough when I point out that you can put the entire British Isle into Arizona with room to spare.
Wait,
So
really? It's
you
really,
can,
I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
okay,
And
wow.
it's the sheer density that makes,
Yeah.
you can drive from here, to Utah in a
Yeah.
day. In the
Yeah.
UK, you're lucky to make it, and
Yeah.
it's because of the density and the quality of the roads and the wine and the whole 9 yards, that make it take a long time to cover what we would consider to be a short distance.
Yeah.
So, there we go. I wanted to ask you, because I had forgotten until I took a look here at your previous work, that you wrote 2 books with James Patterson, who is really a master storyteller. And we've hosted many authors who have done some work with Jim, and they always talk about how much he's taught them about story structure and moving things along really quickly. At what stage in your career, did you write with Jim?
So I wrote my first 3 novels, Pendulum, Freefall, and Aftershock, and then got the call saying, would you like to write with Jim? And he'd read and blurbed my first book, Pendulum. And at the time I didn't realize what, a great thing that was, because I really went into this not knowing much about the business of writing at all. But I got to know his British editor, and she liked my stuff, and basically, I got the call saying, would you like to write with him? And so that was around the time of my 4th novel, and I actually rewrote my 4th novel because of what I was doing with Jim. And I sort of realized that I in my first book, the first 3 books, there's a lot of stuff in there that's what I would call showing off your research, showing off how clever you are, showing, trying to get people to think, oh, I'm quite an intelligent person. Wrong. Take it out. This is all about the entertainment for the reader, for the enjoyment of the reader. Take it all out. And I, the way I describe it now is, nothing can happen in a book, or I also screenwrite. So nothing can happen on a screen. There are great movie moments where ostensibly nothing is happening, but it has to say something about the story or the character. So you can have moments where there's very little going on, but it has to be integral to what's, ultimately propelling the story forward. So you can have changes in pace and everything like that, but it has to be essential to moving that story along. And I think, as you said, that's what Jim does brilliantly, is just propel the reader through the book. And where there is a change of pace, where there is something slower, it's still part of that overall experience. There's never any fat. And I think that's a really important thing to learn as an author.
He gave you a very nice quote for this book, and I certainly have to agree with him. I'm sure Paul will too. It says, like no crime novel I've ever read.
I would also agree with that.
You can't argue with that at all. And John Connolly, who also writes a very interesting, fantastical, the Charlie Parker books are unabashedly bring in, supernatural elements and characters and so forth. And John calls this a strange, compelling, and ultimately moving head spinner, which I think is a great term. Head spinner of a novel. So, you've clearly struck a chord with a lot of writers.
I mean, I think, people have been very receptive. Anthony Horowitz, when we did an event the other night, said it was one of the best books he's read, which I thought was really
that is a
lovely thing to say. Yeah, it's really, and it's something that, and what's interested me about it is actually a lot of, because of the kind of books I've written in the past and my sort of fan base, as much as authors have fan bases, people who've read it so far have tended to be, a lot of guys, a lot of tough guys, and a lot of the reviewers who've read it are people who've reviewed my previous work and tend to be fans of action thrillers, intelligent kind of espionage thrillers, tough people. And I've had people sending me messages, some of them publicly, saying, this made me cry, it's broken me. I did a podcast with someone a couple of weeks ago who said, it's changed the way I look at the rest of my life. I'm changing my life as a result of reading this, because it got them thinking about kind of, that end of the journey and all that sort of thing. And so it's been really interesting that it resonates quite strongly. And I think it's the father and son relationship. It really resonates with men, which I wasn't expecting quite to that that degree, and for people to be quite open about that as well. It's been fascinating. And Peng, I wanted to ask you whether, how you get, what your kind of, because we live in a world now where you're kind of connected to everyone all the time, and people can randomly message you on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or email you or whatever. How do you deal with the response? What kind of responses have you had from readers? How do you react to that? What does it do for you as an author? How do you kind of take that and then use it in your life?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, it's wonderful, because I think in decades past, you would release a book and kind of the only way you knew how it was doing was, I guess, sales or reviews, but you never really heard from readers except for maybe one or two in-person events that you got to do. And so it is really nice to get these wonderful messages, and they just, more come in the beginning when the book comes out, and then you'll get, because every book has a long tail, you'll get little messages of people who've just discovered it and loved it and they want to tell you. And it is really special and kind of intimate, and I do really like it. But it is so hard because they can reach you on, your website or Instagram or Twitter. And in the beginning, with the Book of M, I tried to answer every single one because I felt like I had to, they were reading this book, I need to answer them. And then when the Cartographers came out, there was I still tried to answer them all, but you just can't. There's no way I would never finish the third book. And so it still kind of haunts me that these messages come through. And especially for some reason, the people that message me who've read a translation, I feel like I especially want to say something to them. And I do really, really try to answer those too, but it's, I don't know. I mean, what do you do? Just answer as many as you can. And
I'm before I started writing, I was, I worked in industry and was, did sort of sales and marketing strategy. And so I know the importance of customer service, and it's a curse, right? It's a curse to know how important it is for people to feel valued and connected and all that sort of thing, because I feel I have to answer every message. And so I find myself in downtime on Instagram, on Twitter, and, thank you very much. And it's an amazing thing for readers to engage with your work. And actually what you said there about it being quite a personal connection, the way I talk about it when I'm talking to sort of new writers is that, it is a very, very personal connection. It's you're trying to convey a set of emotions and imagery from your brain into their brain, and you're using words as a translation, as a language between you to try and get all of that across from one mind to another. And so wherever they are, and it passes through time as well. It can be, it's timeless, so a book can last, 300, 400, 500 years and still do that. And that to me is quite a magical thing. And so when you think about it in those terms, I just okay, I have to try and reply to everyone, which is it's a rod for, sort of your own back. So it does mean, and I think it's quite hard then to actually find downtime as an author.
It's very hard. You should be
on,
You think you have communicated. There is actually no downtime. I mean, essentially, I'm at work 24/7 wherever I am. It seems to go that way. And you're right about replying to people, but there is a certain, I don't want to call it, we're talking magical, so I could talk magical. We have about a 20,000 person mailing list. And we were asked if we wanted to try an experiment last week about doing a fundraising thing by creating a line of poison pen merchandise t-shirts. It's an interesting company, and their business model is that if you work with them and design, let's say a shirt, could be something else, with your own business logo or whatever it is attached to it, and you solicit orders over a set period, then they will remit to you a percentage of that order, which might, I don't remember what it is, fairly hefty, all things considered. So it's a great plan for them, but it's a really good plan for us because we don't have to put, any money in it up front. So our store manager designed the shirt, and we thought, how nice, maybe we'll sell 10 or 12 shirts. And when I looked the other day, I sent it out yesterday with a picture of the shirt and a link to it and explained why we were doing it. And I think we've already raised something like $2,800.
Oh, that's great.
Wow.
Which is wonderful. But the magic of this is, think about it, that all those people who are going to get their shirt are walking billboards for the bookstore.
Yeah.
I want a shirt. How do I get a shirt? I want a shirt.
Yeah.
I'll send you the link. But I mean,
Yeah.
and so now we can make like generations of shirts. We actually had merchandise, but we had not updated it because, there just was no incentive to do it. Nobody had any time and whatever. But the reason I brought it up was that I found it so astonishing. I'm telling you, it was like 10 minutes after I sent out this newsletter that the orders were popping up. And I thought, that is so incredibly instantaneous. And there's sort of a power to it. It's like, I mean, I keep getting reports, and I find that as difficult as this instant communication is in many respects. Peng, you remember Sue Grafton, maybe Adam Hamdy. Until the end, she would not answer fan mail unless people wrote her an actual letter. Her attitude was that if they really cared, they would write a letter and put a stamp on it. And if they did, she would reply, because she didn't want to deal with, all the sort of casual or extraneous or whatever, it might be. And I don't think she could get away with that at this point. I think it would be extremely difficult. And both of you, I'm sure that your publisher believes that you will be doing this kind of thing. I mean, it's part of what it is to be published today, is that you have to be an advocate for your book as opposed to your publicist and your publisher. Now it's a much more cooperative thing. And we certainly noticed that in our ridiculous event schedule, that the biggest reactions to events are not from our social media, which is actually pretty good, but it's from the author's social media. The most successful social media authors are the ones who sell the most books and produce the largest audiences. And in a way, that's like a booby trap, because then we can't see any of them. Right. So we think we're okay. We think, well, we have enough books, or we've done this or that, and then boom. And we think, what happened? And then we recognize that there was a universe of people reading your books that are not our universe, but while we were together, they intersected.
Yeah.
Which maybe makes it more possible for people to believe in the kind of fictions that we are talking about that you've just written, because these intersections are, in their own way, even in the real world, they're almost kind of magical, right? We're sharing realities. You're in Mauritius. I don't know where Peng is. Maybe you're in Scottsdale, but last time it was Mexico City or somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm here in my library. And, and we're having a conversation as though we're all sitting around at the bookstore, with audience in front of us. And, if you can believe that, if we can see that, then why wouldn't we believe in the reality that you're setting up in your book?
Yeah.
Very well put. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's very well put. And I think you're absolutely right. We are, as authors, now expected to do all of this. And I sort of, Mauritius, for anyone who doesn't know, is a tropical paradise. And I think, every old school author lived at some point on a tropical paradise. So this was like a rite of passage for me, right? So, but what old school authors didn't have to do was do the social media and the events and all of that sort of stuff. They literally just typed their book up. Some of them didn't even type it up.
Right.
Would just hand it off to a publisher, and they would never hear, you might get a review in the papers, or you might get a letter from somebody or whatever, but that was kind of it. You didn't do this sort of thing, and it's changed. And as you said, it means that if the people I feel sorry for are the introverts, because if you can't come out and talk about your book, if you can't engage with people on social media, your life's quite difficult as an author, because this is how people are finding books. This is how people are engaging nowadays. Do you ever get daunted by all of this, Peng? Are you naturally an extrovert, or?
No, I was going to say, you started talking about that, and I am the biggest introvert ever. And I remember when the Book of M came out, I was just petrified, because I did not know how to talk about my books, and I didn't know, also it was the debut. So on top of that, you have no idea what you're doing. But it was really nice because I realized, I think I thought going in that I had to be this perfect author, capital A author kind of thing. And that's not really what it is about at all, because even though it is all now on, so not all, but a lot of your interactions are on social media or on, in some kind of an event, the people are there because they really do like your books, and the love that they have for your writing is real. And it does feel, even though it's social media, like I said, more intimate because they have read it and they connected with it in a way that is really personal and special. And I've also noticed, interestingly, because I definitely read every single message that I get, and I try to reply to as many as I can. I can't reply to them all, but I've noticed that when I do reply to them, a lot of times I will get a very surprised and grateful response back. And so I wonder if maybe because it's social media, they're actually expecting, like readers are expecting to never hear from you. They just think the message doesn't go into the void. And so that's been kind of nice. It does make it still feel a little bit more, like personal and intimate, even though it is social media, because they, are so happy to finally make that connection with you.
Well, Zoom has certainly changed the world. That made people. I did an event this morning with the Library of Congress about the Great Man's Bible, which my husband's grandfather, Lessing Rosenwald, donated to the Library of Congress. So I was there in the middle of this medievalist who was talking about digitizing this magnificent 1453 Bible and the whole bit. I was there to talk about why Lessing Rosenwald was a collector and why he donated his collection to the library. And, the obvious answer, and I'm sure that they recognize that too, that if you are a book collector, Adam, you might think about this with your son, that's your passion, but a book collection, a library is an incredibly expensive and intensive thing to maintain. And really only the person with the passion for it and the money, to be honest, can do that. And so you do want to hand it off to someplace where they will love it and care for it as much as you did, which was, explain. I'm giving the store to my staff, for example, because, that's my exit strategy, which I really have to be thinking about at my age. So where was I going with that? So, I was just, it was just such an interesting day so far. I have another talk coming up with an author in Vermont whose books I love and I have collected myself. So just in the course of a day, I have been, in Washington with the Library of Congress, and I'm here with you. Then I'm going to go to Vermont and all. And so I come back to my point that I think all of this has to be affecting the way readers will accept diverse story and diverse story structure, because all of reality has really changed. So the other thing we've noticed, and Peng, this will probably come home to you since you do events with us, is that we can't figure out who our live audience is anymore. What we've learned is that people are really very happy now to stay home and watch it. And, the book sales actually are increasing. So that's not the issue. Yeah. But there's a kind of, maybe we've all become more glued to, to our screens, or we feel safer, or, gas costs too much, or it's 114 degrees, or, which it's been, who knows, so it's changing the way we're actually thinking about, trying to present authors.
Well, I'm going to throw another, just on that issue. There's a really good chain of bookstores here in Mauritius called Book Court. And I've gone in because that's kind of one of the first things we do as authors. When you move to a new town, you go to your local bookshop. So I think we were in there the second day we arrived, like the day after we arrived. I was in the bookshop saying hi, and mainly actually to cater to the children who just, as I said, consume books. But it was interesting talking to them, because I said, I'm doing some online events. And the lady who runs marketing for the stores said, would it be okay if we just shared the link to those online events? Because they're free. Can we share them to our customers? I said, yeah, of course you can. No one's going to stop you. I think America, these events are different, they're too early here. But the UK events, they're sharing them to their customers. So you're actually bringing in an international audience. People can watch these things from anywhere in the world.
We have a huge international audience.
Right.
And since ours live forever on Facebook and YouTube, you can share the link and they can watch it anytime they want.
Right. And that changes how you speak to your customers. It changes how many people you can reach and your customer base. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for people, and in a way, I think live events really took off for authors in the 80s, didn't they? That was when it all started getting really quite big.
With the tour that they would go
yeah,
on.
the tour and all that sort of thing. And I think this is changing. This is like another step change in how authors can communicate with people and engage.
Right, but all industries have to change and have to update. My father was one of the people who put General Telephone together, and he retired when he was 50. And by the time he died at 81, the telephone business had changed all out of recognition, and he would have been completely unable to function in it. Because we went from, utility poles and actual wires and phones on walls, and I think many industries have forgotten to ask what business they were in. Railroads, for example, and the post office, and even Xerox, they never really asked themselves the core question, what is our real business? And they got silent. Even Sears and Roebuck, which is where the Rosenwald money came from, is now almost defunct. They just couldn't update. Let me ask Peng before we quit. And Patrick, you might want to come on because you might want to ask some of those questions too. I know that you've been writing away from the US. You like going to a foreign destination to work on your book. So how's it coming? And when can we expect a third book from you? Do you have any idea?
Yes. Oh, actually, I do, because I have to turn the revised first draft into my editor on Halloween, actually.
That's really scary.
So it's done. You can read it all the way through at this point, but I'm just trying to, fine tune it and make everything make sense. And then hopefully, I could say that I'm supposed to give her the final in March of 2023, which would mean it would be out maybe 12 months after that. But, we'll see. After she reads the first draft, we'll see where we're at.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's wonderful to know that you have another book. And is it another original work?
It's a new standalone. It's sort of a sci-fi thriller, I think. So now it's going in another direction now.
Why not?
New genre.
And how about you, Adam? Excellent. We're talking, no pressure here. We're talking about the book
what just came out.
But surely it won't be 6 years till your next book.
Well, so you said you have one coming out, right? Next year?
I'm like some kind of drug addict when it comes to writing. So I've submitted the first draft of my next standalone to my editor to take a look at right now. So this is one of those nerve-wracking times when you're just hoping that she likes it and sees the same things in it that you do. So I'm waiting to hear back on that. And I have a book that I'm working on at the moment with Jim. So this is our fourth book together with James Patterson. So that's what I'm working on right now. And I'm also just delivered a pilot screenplay for a TV show that I'm working on. So my life is just words. I love it.
Do you just write for like 20 hours a day? How do you do
I write a lot. Anthony Horowitz and I talk a lot about sort of our working ethic and how we write and everything. We're very, very similar in how we do things. We both write by hand using fountain pens.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So we both sort of have a similar output. We work 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. And it's a privilege. It's a passion. I love it. So so that's kind of what I'm working on at the moment. I wanted to ask you, Peng, before we wrap up, do you feel you can I did something with James Patterson a couple of days ago, and he said writing his new autobiography had taught him so much as a writer, and I found it interesting that he was still evolving. And he said, I'd be interested, because it feels to me like this is a kind of step change book, the Cartographers, for an author. Like, do you feel like more kind of about what you're doing now in the craft, and do you feel it? Do you feel it was a step change book for you? And like, are you have you gone through that? Looking back at it, do you think it was an evolutionary process?
Definitely. I think I learned I feel like with every book, because I don't think I plan or outline as much as you, that I'm just getting greater control over what I'm doing, because the first one was just a mess, like the whole, it was really fly by night. And so I think with everyone, I just understand structure better, and I can hold the whole thing in my head in a different way. Like I barely have any notes a lot of times for my books. I have like one sheet of paper, and that's like the extent of the notes I have. So it's been, yeah, I think it is evolving every time. Do you still feel like you're learning new things with each one, or was this like a step change that?
Yeah, no, every single book. And I think it's something that I refer to, because there is a book within the Other Side of Night. And it's something I refer to in that the author obviously leaves their imprint on a book. Who you are kind of comes through the books that you write. But the books leave an imprint on you. They leave something. There's something you learn, there's some kind of growth, there's some kind of realization, I think, that you take away from each book. And so, yeah, I'm constantly learning, constantly. I think it's part of being an artist, whether you're a writer or a filmmaker or a painter or a sculptor. Every piece of work you do, you're learning something, you're constantly evolving. And I think that's one of the things that I love about it, that it's a career that you'll never reach the end of. You never kind of reach grandmaster status, and that's it, you stop. And to hear someone like Jim saying, I'm still evolving as a writer, is absolutely fantastic, because that's part of what is so wonderful about writing.
Mm-hmm.
So we could agree that complacency is the enemy of creativity.
Yeah. But
that's a very succinct way of putting it. I wish I'd come up with that. That's great.
You may have it.
And she was an editor, so
right.
We're the writer. We workshopped it, and then she edited it.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So we've done a great many events with Jim, thanks to Zoom. And so when you're done, let's talk about doing an event for the two of you together.
Okay. Yeah,
which would really be nice. Patrick, come and join us. I thought you were showing up sooner, but here you are.
I'm here.
Okay.
Let's see. It's been a great conversation. Do you find that there's like an element of Plato's cave about this whole Zoom world? Here we are.
We're shadow. We're just seeing the shadows of the real world.
Yeah.
That's the English major speaking.
Yeah,
that's
I
right.
love Patrick.
Yeah. Don't get me started on that. I did a degree in philosophy, so Plato's cave is traumatic for me.
But it is interesting how there is an intimacy about it, and some of the questions that we're getting from the viewers are just about, this discussion of, well, these programs helped me get through the pandemic. They connect people in really meaningful ways, when everybody's feeling so isolated and, anxious and all of that. It's, I think, getting online and listening to an hour of people talking about books, what a gift in a lot of ways. Let's see here. Okay, Adam, the inevitable question about film and TV. Anything going on specifically with The Other Side of Night and with your other work in that realm?
Yeah, so The Other Side of Night, I sent a very early version to a friend of mine who's a producer, and I just wanted some feedback to see whether I was crazy or not, and whether there was something in this story. And he loved it so much, he read it over a weekend and he offered for it. And I felt kind of obliged at that point, because he's a friend, and we work well together. We've worked on a number of projects together, and but actually what's happened is he's had some issues in his life because of the pandemic, that has meant he's got to curtail his kind of professional activities. So the rights have effectively come back to me because of this. So it's quite sad, but it does mean that we're just beginning this process again now of actually taking it out to the wider market. And so far the response has been really good. So I'm expecting some news on that front very soon.
Surely Anthony Horowitz could sprinkle a little stardust on you. I mean, that
Yeah.
that's true. He's the most astonishing author. I fell in love with him for Foyle's War, and some other time I'll tell you about my Midsummer Murder Story, which is really
Oh,
fabulous.
cool.
But
Excellent.
what an amazing man! He's only been to see us once, and I really wish that there were a way to reconnect with him.
Oh, you should. I mean, we're doing an event together online, October the 19th. So he does online events, and he's happy to kind of dial in. I think,
Well, maybe you should put him in touch with us. I would love to do something with him.
Yeah.
We're all tremendous fans of his work.
This is my side hustle, is actually setting up other authors as
Why not?
Zoom guests. Yeah. So
Yeah, love it. So Patrick, any other questions?
Yeah, I actually have a question for Pong. You mentioned that you're a fellow introvert.
Mhm.
And of course your mom, very much in the public eye,
Mhm.
as you grew up. Did she have any advice to give you about, okay, Pong, you need to do this and you need to, that kind of thing?
She actually, it's a funny story. So she was very helpful in two ways. The first was that for all of my events for the Book of M, she actually did all my makeup because I didn't know how to do my own makeup. I was like 32 years old.
Remember that?
Yeah. So I would show up at her house and she would, do my mascara or whatever, and then I would go off. But she said, when I was getting ready to go and do these events, and I was super nervous because I am a lot more introverted than her, and I don't have the years and years of experience being in the public eye. And so I asked her for advice, and I thought she was going to have, I don't know, all these like tips or rules or things like that. And she just said, just be genuine. Like, people can tell when you're really being yourself, and that's what they want, is for you to be yourself. And it was kind of terrifying advice because that isn't, you want a formula, if you're an introvert, you want a formula, but it was the best advice because when I, finally decided to accept that and say, I'm just going to be myself, I just, it is more true. It's more authentic. So
Don't have to please anybody,
yeah, well,
She actually came to the store with you for your first event. I still remember that.
Yeah, she
was
did.
so incredibly glamorous. There were like 6 women in 4-inch heels made by Manuel Blahnik or something. And I knew that we had a different audience than our normal. It was just great.
Oh,
What about you as far as Hollywood?
Oh,
Calling?
yes. So it's interesting how they're so cagey about it. I'm not allowed to say any. I can say that good things are happening and we are partway through a process, but they really are very secretive about it. So it's good, but that's all I can say.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I've worked like screenwriting for a while and done some big stuff and some small stuff, and it is so infuriating because
what is the reason for all because it feels very different than the publishing side, which is pretty, they're not that as secretive, and it's so locked down even this far into the process with the Book of M is the one that they're working on. And do you know what the reason is?
I mean, it can vary, but a lot of it is to do with the fact that nothing is set in stone until it's set in stone. And I've literally, we had a film that I wrote where we had a major Hollywood star cast and attached. We had the financing in place, and it fell apart 2 months before we were due to start filming. Well, everything just kind of crumbled. Yeah. And I've had people, friends of mine, who've been on set the first day of shooting and the financing's pulled. Like and you have the crew and it's just there's so many sort of moving parts to these sort of things, and you get executives who leave and a project will stall, and the new exec doesn't want to take it on. There's so many different things, but it's the thing that I'm working on at the moment with the producers in US and the UK looks quite promising. So I can talk about it, but I'm not going to because it may never happen. So, but one thing I wanted to ask, actually, looking behind you, is that number 1 of the Cartographers? Is that the Goldsboro number 1? Is it? Because I see it got a plastic wrapper on it.
Oh, it does.
So if you're a Goldsboro,
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
got the cool.
It's
They put a
number
map
one,
on the
right?
side.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
side,
Wow.
the map on the side. Yeah. So
yeah.
I have here number 7.
Oh
And then
wow.
Very nice.
yeah, so let's see.
Oh,
There we are.
oh,
That's it.
that's so neat. That's really
That's
Yeah.
neat.
really
So
neat.
number
Yeah.
7. So I am a Goldsboro customer as well. So if you're getting a load of Goldsboro books for the Poison Pen of The Other Side of Night,
Mhm.
then it's important your readers know that they're all going to be numbered and signed. They are quite special books. So that's cool. I do like getting the number 1 or sort of author's copy for
Yeah, it's
like
fun.
that.
Yeah.
It's
I
very
have a
good.
question, actually, Adam, that's just come in regarding James Patterson. And the question is simply, do you have a favorite of Jim's work?
Well, that would be the books that we write together. But
Of
no,
course.
I think that probably the favorite is Along Came a Spider. And actually, speaking to him a couple of days ago, what was really interesting was how that book informed his writing style that's led to him being so successful. And he said, that he wrote a 360-page outline, which I just think is a phenomenal thing to want to do anyway. And he said he got to the end of it and he realized that he'd written the novel. It was all very conversational and kind of he'd written a sketch, but he realized, oh, actually, this is the book. I want it to be this kind of pacey and light in terms of sort of description and everything. And he said he just went back through and worked it up into a novel, but that was it. And so hearing him talk about it in those terms made it even more special.
That's fascinating.
It was
Barbara,
kind of a discovery. Yeah, it was a discovery book for him, which
I don't think
makes it even more
I
special.
don't think I've ever heard anything quite like that, Barbara. Have you? I mean, I've heard people over the years talk a lot about outlining, but I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, I finished the outline and that's the book. That, it's basically, that's basically the book.
I've heard Brandon Sanderson, I think, talk about 100-page or 150-page outlines, which makes sense, I guess, because they're these epic fantasies with a million
Ridley
characters.
Pearson too, right, Barbara?
Well, Jeffrey Deaver. Jeffrey certainly does. But I do think that Adam's point is that in writing the outline, he discovered his writing style is different. And that really is fascinating. So
Yeah.
I appreciate your sharing that. We really need to bump off the air. So I want to thank you for your time. And I want to thank everybody who's watched this. Adam, if you'll, or Pong, both, if you want to hang on a minute, I do have something I want to say to you afterward. So anyway, we do have just arrived, in fact, The Other Side of Night, because Tuesday was publication day here in the US, which is wonderful. And we're certainly looking forward to seeing Pong for her next book, whenever it does come out. In the meantime, we have the Cartographers. So yay. Anyway, thanks everybody.
Can I say thanks very much? Thanks, Patrick and Barbara and Pong, and thanks for having me. It's been really lovely.